the death positive movement, to my understanding, to our understanding, is, kind of what we've been saying, where it's just this reframe of, rather than death being a tragedy and being the worst thing that could happen, to just having more curiosity there, rather than like tragedy, horrible, worst thing that ever could happen to anyone, both, losing a loved one or to yourself.
My mom has stage 4 cancer in her bones and in her breast. My dad's disease was 15 years, he died of ALS. I made a podcast about death, seemed like the thing to do. And if you're sad by all of this, well, you're gonna die too. Erin and Machete, it is so cool to be here with you today after seeing your feature film on the big screen, Moon Manor. I'm very excited to have you, so thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having us. We're so excited to be here. It was just such a cool moment to meet you at our screening at the Newport Film Festival, and just even hear that you have a podcast about grief and humor I was just like, what? Okay. So the fact that it only natural that we would be, joining forces in this way and being on your podcast, but love everything you're doing. So thank you for having us.
Of course. Thank you guys for being here. I know I love the theme of your film too, which we're going to talk about shortly. But to kick off the interview, I start all of my podcast interviews the same way, and that is by asking about your goldfish moment. And this is the first time that you thought about or conceptualized death in some way. For some people, it was a goldfish. Are there moments from your childhood that come to mind when I say that? Goldfish moment. Did your goldfish die? Goldfish moment. Did it make you cry?
Well, it's not to talk about the movie straight up, but we actually put that moment into the beginning of Moon Manor. We have a very young character play Jimmy, our lead character's next door neighbor, and her mom is like, oh, Winnie's goldfish just died, and so we're talking about mortality. So just going to do a mini plug of Moon Manor. So we literally have that in the movie. It's like her goldfish has died, and it's in the first 2 minutes. So Erin, if you want to take it away on a personal front, go ahead.
What comes to mind for me is just the first time. Wow, that's such a beautiful question. I like, with these sort of things, it's like I like to just go with the first thing that's coming to me, even though it's maybe doesn't make exact sense. When I was a kid, when I was 5, we lived in, at the time we still lived in the San Diego area, and my parents, we had 20 or something acres of greenhouses behind our house. My parents were in the plant business, and they caught on fire. And one of my earliest memories is watching this fire just encroaching upon our house, just as high as the eye could see, and just nose pressed against glass, oh my God. And I remember the feeling, the feeling of fear of my parents, and this, we have to get out of the house. We've called the 911 or the firefighters, and the concept of that there was something that could happen if we didn't get out, the feeling of safety, that is, I think that would maybe be a goldfish moment, where it was the level of my parents' reaction of realizing that what would happen if that fire came into our house meant we would never be leaving the house again. And I feel there was something in that coupled with, at the same time, my mom first had breast cancer when I was a year old. So I think the feeling, and knowing from my earliest breaths and memories that mom was sick, that even if it wasn't an exact right, one day you die sort of a thing, there were these tones, these moods from the fire, and then from knowing about my mom knowing the words chemo and cancer are some of my earliest words.
Thank you for sharing that, and that you were 1 year old. I relate in that I was quite young. I was not one, but I think there's something really specific about having a parent being diagnosed that early on. Could you talk a little bit more about that? Do you remember when you first realized what cancer was more specifically? Can you talk about memories a few years into your life?
Yeah. What comes to me is the understanding that, because the way it worked, they removed my mom's lymph nodes on the side where her cancer was. And that created that one arm was always swollen, and she'd have to get lymphatic massages. She had no circulation on one side. So it was interesting, because the cancer, it was more about the fact that one of mom's arms was 3 times bigger than the other one, and she had to be really careful with it. And it was sort of this like odd thing that then, but it also connected to the idea of like illness and what I now through therapy as an adult looking back, I know now was maybe to her it made sense at the time, but the coping mechanism and the process of just like not acknowledging it. So even though I knew that there was serious medical stuff going on, it wasn't like we were really discussing it as far as like fears or anything. It was more like it's a thing, but we don't talk about it. So I think just to go right, I know we're already diving right into it, but there's even that thing of like fear or grief or illness is shameful in a way, because it's like, it's a thing you don't talk about, even though it's happening. And those being like really early messages. And then I also like have been tapping in through my own like therapies and somatic work of understanding that when my mom was holding me in my first year of life, or in her first, my baby experiences, how much anxiety and worry she must have been having, that she wasn't going to see me grow up. And as I go through my own work and understanding, attachment theory and what you ingest about the world around you in the first few years of your life, what that must have been like. So there's a lot to unpack there for my therapist and I for the rest of my life.
Yeah, just for the rest of your life, casually, just forever and ever, just thinking about that. No, but I appreciate the work that you have done and being able to reflect that back. And I mean, right, it's so interesting what happens to us in our first few years of life and how that shapes us forevermore, and yet how much we choose to identify with that story versus how much it is the story, whether or not you're identifying, versus how much like you're like, I'm gonna let that go, but no, it's helpful to think about it. And so the cycle continues. And Machete, I will come back to you in just a moment. Erin, since my own mother has stage 4 metastatic breast cancer, have a particular empathy and curiosity about your story, which I know we just discovered in person when I came to see your film. I knew you had a connection to death. I did not know what it was. Here we are. Do you mind sharing a little bit more about what it was like growing up, watching your mom have cancer, like you just said, through the time of her death, and how that's shaped you today?
Sure. Well, interestingly, she was in remission after that bout which would have been like 85, 86. And she did full chemo, lost all her hair, did the whole thing. And then she just had the one arm situation, but she was in remission for 20 years until, when I was 19 and she was re-diagnosed. And then it all happened very fast in that last year. But, just to also the thing that you and I share, Chelsea, yay, tragedy train. But my dad was very sick my whole life. So in 4th grade, found out that he had Hep C, and it always feels like I have to say it wasn't actually from like drugs and alcohol, which a lot of people, not that there's anything wrong with that, the stigmas, et cetera. It's a whole long story. So growing up was actually more about the dread of my dad being sick, because he was actively sick, actively specialists and treatments and injections and medications and side effects and trial drugs and constant worry there. And my mom was like chill, and my mom was fine until like she wasn't. And then it was really fast. So that like 1-2 punch of the both parents, that like constant thing of like your caretakers, our health is not a guarantee, which I've continued. It'll be interesting on this whole episode or this whole meeting right now. It's like, usually when I talk to people about these things in my life, the like tendency then is to like tie it up in a bow at the end that they'll feel comfortable, to help them feel comfortable with what I'm sharing about my life story, that other people, they just don't know what to say. It's like, wow, that's really hard. That really sucks. It's really tragic. So I'll tie it up in a bow for them. And then I learned this, but it's all okay because I became a stronger person. But I feel like in this company and for these listeners, I don't have to do that. So I'm going to not do that. Just leave it there.
Yes, leave them on a cliffhanger feeling uncomfortable. No, I love that you said that. And it's so true. I think that anytime we're talking about grief, or for those listening or who have not experienced grief specifically, any kind of trauma or difficult experience, it is like, okay, I'm going to talk about this, but I'm going to make sure everyone feels taken care of. And that's interesting that we as human beings have those tendencies as women, as caretakers. Is it in our biology? Is it just like how we have been raised and trained to behave? But I'm glad that you are going to leave it messy and raw. Just leave it out there for everyone. And thank you for sharing that about your dad. I didn't realize, and that is really interesting, the similarities, even though different illnesses. It's like having caretakers be sick is very specific. And the fact that your mom was in remission for 20 years, incredible and also painful. And my mom's was 17 years in remission before it came back. So we do have these similarities. And it's really interesting that I have learned over time that it is really, really unfortunate, and it is not as shocking as I once thought it was. Like when my mom's came back, we were shocked. We were like on the floor, like, what? And then doctors were like, actually, this happens. I wonder if you could share what it was like when your mom was diagnosed for the second time. You mentioned it happened very quickly, but of course it is shocking. But how are you feeling at that time?
Oh, yeah, blindsided. Just absolutely rug pulled out from under you. No skills to, this was 2000, and when she was re-diagnosed, it was like 2003. And I feel like even just with how much the world and the conversation has evolved since then is incredible in terms of, and I think social media has a lot to do with that in terms of just the more national conversation of grief and going to therapy. So at the time, I didn't go to therapy. We didn't seek a counselor, my family, myself individually. Like that was something that you only did if you were a crazy person, or, at least in the culture of my family, that was just not even something, we never even talked about doing that. So there was definitely like rug pulled out, and honestly up in denial, like up until the very end, like even at her funeral, like this didn't really happen. Like I'm not really going to be someone who lost their mom at such a young age. And I think, yeah, just denial, and being also at that age, I was like 19, I was so wrapped up in my life. I was also like killing it at life. That was like this great period where I was interning at Rolling Stone magazine, and I was competing in beauty pageants, and I almost won Miss Nevada, and I was going to Miss America. I mean, I just was like killing it at life. So I was also just, I don't know, like it's, which I say, I don't hope I don't sound like a brat in saying that. I think I say it, I share it because like, I think there was also this sense of injustice, but like, wait, I'm doing everything right, where I'm being like a good student and I'm being a go-getter and achiever. Why is something bad happening to me? And just these sort of universal things, then life slaps you around enough, you come to realize like none of that, it doesn't, God laughs at well-made plans, right?
Yeah. Thank you for sharing your experience. And it fucking sucks. I have breast cancer I would say like a special place in my heart, but then I'm like, I don't want fucking cancer in my heart. So like, knock on wood, I shouldn't say that, but it just sucks. It sucks how common it is. 1 in 8 women, right? But the more that we can be aware and, do things like undergo genetic testing if one wants, it's a personal choice, and or just being aware of our family history, and or just as simple as going to a doctor once a year starting in your 20s and 30s, getting your blood checked, etc., like that. Machete, are you comfortable sharing a little bit more about your own family illnesses and what that looks like today? How are you feeling?
It's interesting. Erin and I have known each other for a very, very long time. So witnessing each other's families go through this has been, you said trauma bonding, but it is, as Erin said, a trauma train. So I think I just want to say I'm just so grateful, like, that we've had each other through these moments and have been able to be there for each other. Like maybe not all the time, but for most of it. So Erin, I'm grateful for you. I'm sorry you've had to go through so much. I know you know my story, so here I go with my story. I think just to bring it back to the goldfish moment about death, what pinged to me, it's funny. It's like I've had a lot of near death experiences. So my first time with death was when I was 4, and I was very sick. I had a very intense flu or some sort of cold. My parents had just recently, they owned a restaurant, or not a restaurant, sorry, a resort that had a restaurant for like 40 years, and this was one of their first years of opening, and it was Thanksgiving week, and my mom was like doing all the dishes. It was like a big event for my parents, so they had my aunt and uncle watch me and my sister for like that time because they were not going to be available because they had this huge event. But I was really, really sick, and my aunt and uncle I was given children's Tylenol. It was like the grape flavored kind, and I don't know if you remember that, but it was very sweet. It was very like sugar, and I have a sweet tooth. So I went and I in the middle of the night went and ate the whole bottle, like a big ass bottle. And I
Wow.
like OD'd, like OD'd on this shit. Um, I don't even remember. I just was like my body was shutting down. I mean, I was 4. It was this huge bottle. My organs were starting to shut down. And if it weren't for my cousin Kenny, thank you, Kenny, because I hid it because I knew I hid the empty bottle because I was like, oh no, I'm gonna be in trouble because I ate it all, right. And so I stashed it. And he ended up finding it. So then they rushed me to the hospital, pumped my stomach. I remember coming to like hospital lights, the nurses, doctors over me with like a tube down my throat. So that was like the first time my goldfish moment was experiencing it. And, I think ever since then I've had a lot of, not to spiral into even more trauma, but I was sexually assaulted when I was 16. And dealing with that, I was very suicidal for a very long time. And like, I realized now in the last couple years, I'm getting like PTSD treatment for it because it actually is post traumatic stress disorder that I found out. So it's been a very long journey of a very intimate connection with death for me, which is not scary for me, but I know it can be scary to hear to others where it's like, what? Suicide? Like, that's crazy. That's taboo. I don't even know how to talk about it. So for me, on my end, it's been this interesting experience of obviously witnessing. We can get into this a little bit too if we want, like witnessing others die, but also kind of being on the edge of death. And I think that's for me, I think that's a great barometer how I see life is like I'm like death is right there. It's right there at all times. It could be a terminal illness, it could be something really quick. We just don't know. So I think that's why it's so scary. But for me, I don't know. I have an appreciation for it. I guess it's just been a bit of a more intimate connection with death.
Yeah, thank you for sharing a little bit more about how you see the world, and like that's so scary when you're 4 years old. Oh my gosh, I'm glad that you are still here, and yet like it makes sense that both of you have these different but intrigued. You have these unique appreciations for and respect and understanding of death in different ways, and then how that brought you together to make this film. Which before we discuss, I just wanted to touch on Machete. Are you comfortable sharing a little bit? You mentioned earlier that your mom has Alzheimer's. Can you talk about how that's going? I definitely know listeners personally whose parent has Alzheimer's. It's rough, and I'm sure they would love to hear from you.
Yeah, I don't mind. I mean, her personal story with it is she was in a lot of denial. Now she's at the point where she is needing 24 assistance. So, as far as it goes, like I want to respect her wishes. I won't go too deep. I don't know how she feels about it, obviously, but Erin also, her grandmother had Alzheimer's, and maybe even other family members. I'm not sure, Erin, but I do know like her grandmother had Alzheimer's. So we both have these connecting factors with that disease. Yeah, I moved home in 2020 to be with her because, well, the pandemic, and also this was the time to do it, right? And she didn't particularly need a lot of help at that point, but I just wanted the last time I could get with her before it got any worse, and it has progressed a lot. It's very advanced. So I don't know, it's this weird teeter-totter, I think, of grieving, constantly grieving the person that you've known your whole life, right? And they've changed. Their personality is completely different, what they talk about, what they remember, and there's this other weird thing where becoming the parent, living with them and taking care of her, just understanding her on a different level has been really rewarding, but it is a very strange space to be in, which I think anybody who has a parent who's sick, it's like, yeah, you don't know when they're gonna go. Obviously, Alzheimer's, I think, is I don't know. She could go pretty swiftly, but Yeah, I mean, I think I'm in it right now. I don't have the bows, right? Like Erin was saying, I don't have like the key moments of like, oh yeah, and then this, and then this, and then this, and I've filled in the gaps, right? And I'm in the in between of the key moments. So to me, it's just this constant, just really be in the present, be in the now. I'm grateful for the time I get, and everything else, whatever. It kind of just everything kind of goes out the window of, oh no, I have a zit on my chin, or I don't know, the things that we care about or vanity or whatever. It's like, yeah, you're just in a position of a caretaker and you're like, wow, this is short. And we just got to jump in and not really, I don't know. I think that's been the biggest shift for me, is that I don't care about certain things the way I used to, right? Like, I mean, being a filmmaker, right? Getting that next big music video or like whatever that is. I'm like, oh, I put so much emphasis and so much care into it, which I still do. But now it's kind of balancing that out with, okay, but is this really important? Is this email are you gonna let this email you get spike your anxiety to the point where you like look at your mom and you're like, yeah, we're good. she this can wait. I don't need to get like precious about certain things anymore. So
Yeah, thank you so much, Machete, for sharing that. And that was beautiful. And thank you for the zit reference. I actually have a huge zit,
oh,
and it's really pissing me off. No, I'm just kidding. No, but like, but I'm laughing because it is bothering
I
me.
can't
But
see
also
it. I
don't
can't
care.
see it. Just letting
No.
you know, I can't see it. It's too.
I was like, she's talking about me.
No.
It's about me. Just kidding. No, just kidding. No.
No, I have like
appreciate
3 right now, so that's why I'm like,
Okay.
oh.
No, I'm totally kidding. I know we're like, yeah, it really is true. Perspective is everything. And, for people listening who has a parent who has been recently diagnosed, I think it's really valuable to hear, like you're saying, you're in it, right? Because that's something that I find interesting. People reach out to me when like their parent gets diagnosed with something, because that's the beginning of their journey. Even if their parent will be alive for a long time, it's often the first time people have thought about, okay, mortality, what's the deal? Like my mom has this, or my sibling has this. So I appreciate that. And I'm glad you are home and getting to spend some time with her. And it's hard as fuck. And that's a lot. I just quickly have to like, and then let's move forward. But the age old story that I've shared in these interviews before is my dad with ALS. It affects your muscles. It does not affect your brain. You become paralyzed, which he was for over a decade, but with a lot of pain medication that comes from it, a lot of things are happening. So your brain, like sometimes you're going in and out. So my dad would ask me to make sandwiches. We don't really know why. It was something that kept happening. He would be like, hey, I would love a sandwich. And there was like, we were not in the kitchen, and I would like turn around and like make one, and it wasn't there, and it's really funny, and it's not funny, but like we don't know why. He would just see things, and he would but only sandwiches. Like he didn't see other things. And so I was like 10 and would like make him fake sandwiches. So anyways, that's, you just have to laugh. I don't really know where I'm going with that.
No, well, because there's humor in it, there has to be. It's like not all so downtrodden, it's like the same thing with my mom. Like she makes me laugh. Like some of the shit she'll be like the stuff that comes out of her brain, her mouth. I'm like, what? It's so I do think there is a weird levity to it, no matter what. Like it could be the severest things, but there's always humor and all situations, kind of.
Love it. I couldn't agree more. So speaking of humor, you have a comedic death film. I would say not just comedic. I would say a dark comedy or even a dramedy. I've seen the film. I know what it's about. I would love for you as filmmakers to describe a little bit about what the film is about. And I would love to hear about your decision to spotlight Jimmy originally.
Yeah, our movie is called Moon Manor, and it takes place in one day. And it's the day that Jimmy, who's our lead character, who's 80 years old in the movie and in real life, he's decided to go out like he's lived his life with a lot of intention and humor and sparkle. So the movie follows his last day on Earth, in which he has an obituary writer that he's chosen come over to spend the day with him to observe his last day and learn about his life, to then write his obituary. He has his death doula show up to, of course, guide him through the transition. His caretaker's there throughout the day. and then several other like quirky friends and some amazing drag queens that are going to MC his, what he calls his funeral rather than a funeral. They come, there's a whole confrontation with these religious protesters who are there to protest that he's having, choosing his own death. And I don't want to say more than that because there's some spoiler alerts there, and you have to see the film because the way that whole storyline unfolds is just great writing. Not that, obviously biased because myself and Machete wrote the movie, so we think it's very well written. And yeah, so the movie, it's really, we say, a couple of the things that we say that we've developed as kind of our go-to slogan, so to speak, is it's like, well, one is actually a Ram Dass quote that we took from the psychedelic guide to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which is, what if the art of living is actually the art of dying? That's a quote that we use, that we love, as to kind of explain the movie. And also, like, sometimes learning how to live is learning how to die. And we were very inspired by the movie Harold and Maude. If y'all haven't seen that, it's from the late 70s. It's a classic of cinema, but it's not necessarily, it wasn't like a blockbuster. People that have seen it that know are like, oh my God, it's the best movie ever. And others like me, if you haven't seen it and you'll see this podcast, I think you'd really love it. And it's very much a literal laughing in the face of death. And we just were both really drawn to that message. And us both having had these profound experiences with death and watching people we love transitioning and all these different aspects of it. And then with Jimmy, and then the other tie-in, into your question, with Jimmy, who is also the name of the actor is Jimmy Carazo. And then, we just kept his name. That maybe that wasn't the most original writing. It's just also his character's name. He is my honorary uncle. And I grew up knowing him as Uncle Jimmy. All of our friends, everyone calls him Uncle Jimmy. He's kind of like everyone's uncle in our group of filmmakers and creatives. So he was my real uncle, whose name is Rick. He was his life partner and his partner in entertainment. They had like a singing, dancing, acting, comedy, touring musical act that is absolutely epic. There's some of their footage is seen throughout the movie, throughout Moon Manor. So Rick, my real uncle, died of AIDS in 86. So I did me, he held me as a baby, but I have no memories of him. So I grew up learning and even knowing about Ricky by way of Jimmy. So Jimmy stayed in my family. My family, embraced him with open arms, even though, obviously it was like a different time back then when they were together, and they were together for 20 years. But yeah, my family definitely liberal, progressive, and embraced Jimmy, and he stayed in our family fully as my uncle. So, and he's, from his touring act with Rick, he was an actor since Jimmy will say, he's an act. The first thing he ever wanted to do was be an actor. And his biggest dream as like a kid growing up in New York and Queens was like, I'm going to be the star of my own movie someday. And now he'll say, it took 80 years, but he did it. And now, Jimmy's 84 from when we shot the movie. So that's the connection to Jim originally, was by way of me. And then Machete met him, years and years and years ago, because she and I have been, I don't know if we clarified this, but we've been best friends since 8th grade. So we go way back. So Machete met Jimmy pretty early on. And as anyone who comes in his orbit was just, fell in love with him. He's so mesmerizing. So yeah, so it's interesting when you think about making your first feature, what of all the stories, what are you going to write? What are you going to do? What's it going to be? And a lot of people tend to do, or are often doing, coming of age movies in that position, because it's just like, a universal experience. We all love those movies, but we were pretty clear of like, let's do something different. I think Machete first coined this idea of making a coming of death movie rather than a coming of age movie. And it's also like coming of age, a different type of coming of age. Like you still are those, the twilight years or what have you. So those were some of the inspirations behind it and our connection to him. And yeah, there's so much more to say on that, but that's kind of the broad strokes.
Beautiful. I love that description and the funeral, and I love the two religious guys. I don't know if you guys know, I actually know Galen, and we like have worked on some stuff together, and I like saw him at the premiere. He was like, hey, and so the two religious guys, those are my favorite like comedic relief characters. So that was so funny. And
Yeah, that's
Small world, right?
such a small world. I know Galen's everywhere. He's like in everything. um
Yeah, and for the listeners who haven't seen the movie yet, which we hope you'll all want to go see it after this, but the two religious road protesters are played by Galen Howard, who Chelsea's worked with. Who he's like a character actor who's you're just his face. He's been in so many music videos. He pops up everywhere. He's currently in the Star Wars, the Book of Boba Fett movie that's out. And then the other protester is Richard Reilly, who is also a very, very famous character actor who a lot of people will recognize from Office Space. He's the guy with the mustache and his face. He's one of those two. Everyone's like, he's the one we get the most. Like, I know that guy. So those two are two clutch. Yeah, I love their arc and their role as well in the story.
So good.
They're so
It's
funny.
good.
And they're like twins almost. It's like in various ways, like in actuality, like Galen is this little protege of, doing the same thing. Like he's in everything. He doesn't care how big the role is, and Richard, same thing. He's been in, I think, over 400 movies or
Wow.
projects at this point. So them together on screen, it was so funny. And Galen came in, and you know how wonderful he is, and just how expressive he is Terry. We're like, this is Terry. Like, so
Galen.
it's fun to watch.
What a guy.
Them. Yeah, what a guy.
So good.
So good.
Okay, so we have definitely a lot of collaborative and creative people who listen. So to ask about the filmmaking process, which of course is another whole hour's worth of chat, but to narrow down to one question, Machete, what was the most rewarding aspect of making this film, and what was the most surprising or challenging aspect?
Oh God, you're right. We need hours. What's interesting is once again, we're still in it, like kind of when we was talking about my mom, we're like not past that finishing point, and we probably won't be for because right now we're just looking at when this comes out, it'll be maybe 2 days out from being, digitally released on demand in North America, but that's just North America. So we've yet to even get to the international sales. So we probably have another year of really actually finishing this and then being able to kind of latch off and kind of look back. But I will say it's been 5 years since we started this project writing and it'll be 5 years by the time it's released. So I think there are various things that I can look back on and rejoice. And I'd say it's the feeling of it's working, when in ET, when Peter is the little beep, beep, beep thing is going, and Peter what's the little kid? Anyway, he looks back at ET and he's like, ET, it's working. It's like that. It's that feeling when you get everybody on set. It's all fucking gelling. It's like all the yeses, right? So we've also been producing this creatively, and so we did the casting. We got it's just been enormous validation, I guess, to rejoice in people believe not just in us, but the script and Jimmy's story, because it very much has a lot of his real life stories in it, as Erin said. So I think it's been the most rewarding is that people saying yes to us and just continuing. And it keeps going. Every time we got distribution, and then we got picked up by Showtime, and Showtime is going to be streaming us for 2 years. So it's this, they keep saying yes to this project. This is great. So I think it's been rewarding to see that over time, to be we stuck it through. Erin and I have been doing this, showing up day after day. I can't even tell you how much we've shown up for this. And we've shown up and said yes to each other, to this project. And so it's great to see that the community and beyond is saying yes to it. I think the most surprising, I guess that, as well, the most surprising is also oh shit, we got Showtime. That's crazy. And this is so niche. So it's really great to see independent film thrive and get, eyes on it. So, I mean, there's so many things I think that are overwhelming in the process. It's much like death, where you're oh, I didn't know this came with the territory in this way. Fuck. I didn't know we had to do this much technical aspect. Oh shit, the deliverables is a whole other hour-long chapter in itself. But yeah, I think it's it's a beautiful process that parallels a lot of life, and it will give you lessons that you will take with you into life and not just for artistic purposes. And I think that's what's been really like surprising is the knowledge and the growth that we both have gone through with learning even more about filmmaking prior to than what we knew, and also just like being able to bring it into our own worlds in the reality way.
Amazing. Huge congrats on your deal. That is incredible. I feel like I could talk for an hour about like how that happened and how you set that up. But the point is that's fantastic that it did. Like you said, having independent film thrive is fantastic. For aspiring filmmakers and those looking to set out to make their first feature film, what is the number one piece of advice you would give them? What is the number one thing you would say? As long as you have blank, you are off to a good start.
As long as you have a burning need to tell the story that you're going to tell, you can do it. We have come up against this time and again where we reach burnout, and it's not just like one time. It's like there's chapters on chapters, and we'll go through a whole, just the sheer pre-production, the logistics and getting everyone, then the sheer fundraising that continues, waves of fundraising, and then the edit, which Machete edited brilliantly. So that was just a whole giant job in and of itself. And then now deliverables. I mean, I could go on, but each chapter has its own, we're like gearing up for battle. Here we go. Let's go do it again. And then you go and you're going up the hill. You're like, emails, basically just you're sending millions of emails. Making a movie is sending emails. And then you're like, slump. And then you hit the wall and you have to like gear up again. That's happened so many times. But the thing that will keep getting us through it is that we're telling Jimmy's story. We're telling a story also that we're like crystallizing our own painfully earned experiences and lessons of death. And it's so important to us to tell this story and to be able to offer another view of looking at death. There's one thing I heard recently that our culture treats death as a tragedy. Well, some cultures don't. A lot of cultures, it's like, this is a beautiful, just also a part, not to say it's not sad and hard and you miss people when they're gone, but it's a very natural part of the life cycle. But in our culture, it is a tragedy. The words around it are always just like, I'm so sorry. It's so heavy. It's so all these things that we're just to offer another perspective, which all just gets back to the point is to make an indie film, you will be confronted. It will be so challenging. You're going to want to quit so many times. I think maybe some other people, it's like way easier. We don't have like major financial sponsor. Like I think a lot of people, there's a reason that there's a threshold, a socioeconomic threshold to making movies, because it really is a very expensive art form. So a lot of people get into it. Like we didn't go to film school. We don't have a benefactor, a really wealthy relative or person who was willing to put up we had to raise the budget entirely ourselves. All these things that like, at the end of the day, for an aspiring filmmaker, don't make this movie you think you should make. That because most people are always like, make the horror films. Most people I don't want to say most. A lot of people start with horror films because everyone will tell you that's, the best way in. You'll make a lot of, your best chance to recoup your money, all these things. And it's like, I do feel like we're proof that our movie, the fact that we have a major deal, that we got distribution, and then we have a major deal that's coming up. We have a big we have a theatrical premiere and theatrical run that starts next week. And our movie stars an 80-year-old man no one has ever heard of. And it's about something that most people call depressing. There's not a single sex scene. There's no hot young actor just breaking out of Sundance. We don't have a single ingredient that most people try to get or that you're told you need to have for this to happen. But what we have is a story that we had to tell that would keep us going and that we really felt like the world needed this story. So I would say that's the number one thing, is like make a story that you'll be able to stick with. It's going to take you like 5 years. 5 years is fast that we've been able to make this movie. It's going to take you years. You're going to want to quit so many times. You have to love it. You have to want to tell it above all else. And it really does help telling someone else's story, because then you're kind of like stuck. Because Jimmy, whenever we're like, oh, we're so over it, Jimmy would be like, how's the movie coming? Like, how he's telling my one chance to tell my story before I die going. Like, okay, it's really motivating.
Wow, that was very inspiring and honest, and I appreciate everything you just said. Yes, 5 years is fast and feels like a lifetime at the same time. So I'm so glad that you are seeing the success. I have so many more questions about the intricacies of fundraising and pre-production and post, and the artist in me like has so many more things. But for the sake of time, maybe that has to be a part 2 in a year when you're doing the next release or the next film or something. I don't know. What is the death positive movement in your eyes? Tell us about your showing at Reimagine Life in San Francisco.
So the death positive movement, to our understanding, is, kind of what we've been saying, where it's just this reframe of, rather than death being a tragedy and being the worst thing that could happen, to just having more curiosity there, rather than like tragedy, horrible, worst thing that ever could happen to anyone, both, losing a loved one or to yourself. So death positivity movement, it feels like it's this kind of like army of us that are like, hey, let's look at this in a different way. Let's take some of the heaviness out of it and offer more levity. And a big part of it, to my understanding, is breaking out of the denial of death, because that's just like this hilarious thing that a lot of people do. Like, it's not going to happen to me. You spend your whole life pretending like it's not going to end. And it's such a liberating thing to really embrace your inevitable death. And I think the death positivity movement is really about that, like how much freedom and joy in life you could have if you actually are thinking about your death. So that's my understanding. I didn't coin the term, so I feel like there's so many other shades to it. And then in terms of Reimagine End of Life, which is the most wonderful nonprofit that we are so lucky to have become involved with by way of a friend had suggested them. And back in 2019, they awarded us a grant to present an early rough cut of the film in San Francisco. Looking back, I'm also just, it's so cool we got to do that, because the pandemic happened and they haven't been able to have another in-person event. And it was a in-person festival in San Francisco and New York, and now it's been all virtual. I do think they are planning to come back in person this summer, though. So what we did, our original plan we screened an early cut of the movie. We had hoped we were going to do a different theme about how death is usually portrayed in film, and we actually ended up screening the film itself and had that conversation by way of that. I do want to share that we're actually going to be doing another event with them end of March. So if people that are listening are interested in what Reimagine is, you can either look them up, or just, if you're following along with us in our journey with this film, we're going to be doing something. Yeah, I think it's looking like end of March. We'll be doing another collaboration, a virtual event with them. And that's their whole, I think their tagline is like reimagining end of life through creativity and compassion.
Beautiful. I've been recommending them to some people because I'm from the Bay Area and everyone says good things. So that's so cool that you guys did that. I love it. Okay, this is something that I find really interesting because there's no right or wrong answer. And I say this without judgment, just coming from curiosity. Can you talk about your position to omit your personal stories about death from your website? I just thought it was really interesting because you guys do have these interesting stories that are not necessarily showcased. Is that something you're very passionate about not doing? I'm of the belief we do not have to air everything personal about us and air all of our trauma. But I was just curious, like, what comes to mind when I bring that up?
Like on our Moon Manor, moonmanormovie.com website.
Yeah, I couldn't really find like your personal like death like experiences and stories on there. Like, and as like an artist, like I'm just interested in when people like I want to share or I don't, or it's like the film's not about that. Like I'd rather people focus on the film, my own stuff, or if you're just like, I don't know, I just didn't. I was just curious.
I mean, for this particular case, it is like the movie is about Jimmy, even though it is with our narrative thread and our fictional narrative thread throughout. Like a lot of it is his beliefs and a lot of his own personal stories. So, I mean, I think it would be cool to add on if we wanted to. I think we've been in such a place right now of like, we're still, like I said, in the midst of it and continuing to add on as we go. Like, we're still finishing, technically in a way. Like, we're still really just trying to wrap up the film. But I think that presents a great way to open up the discussion of death. I know we had discussed adding a resource page so that people can go and figure out where they can learn more about death doulas or death positive movement so I think that's going to be expanding as we go. So you just offered us a great alternative to be like, hey, if letting this is how we approach death. It is in the form of this movie, and it is in the form by way of Jimmy and his own version of what he wants to do, because a lot of this is what he really wants to do in his own life. So I think it would be great to expand on that, but it wasn't necessarily like, no, we have to not, I don't even think it came to mind. Maybe we've never even thought about this. I think it has more to do about, let's open up just the discussion of death in general and come on these beautiful podcasts and do these awesome interviews that allow us to talk about our personal experiences. But I don't know, we'll definitely sidebar about that to expand that, maybe in the resource page or something.
Yeah, for sure. Or who knows, as you do interviews, like if you put those on, like if you had like a press page, then I feel like if you want to know more about our personal stories, it's like these are the things that do that. But yeah, I was just curious. So because it is the Dying of Laughter podcast, is there a comedic moment surrounding your own experiences with grief or a particularly comedic moment on set that comes to mind that was just like so funny or bizarre you had to laugh?
When is it like not funny? I guess there's a part of me that's just like, when is it like not funny? I don't know. I think that's a double question right there, right? Like, what's a personal experience we've had? I mean, Erin, do you want to, is anything just pinging?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind for me is, and this was something we ended up writing into the movie, which is the first time I was in the room with a dead body was my grandmother that died, a different grandmother, not the one that had Alzheimer's. She died like my second week of freshman year of college. She had an aneurysm, and I was in the hospital, like in the aftermath, which I think she was kind of still on life support, but then they were, taking her off life support. And we were all in the room as that happened. And then it's like saying goodbye. And you're like, obviously, so you're crying. And my grandfather had been sitting with her at dinner when it happened, the aneurysm, it just all happened so fast. And then as the body does, it's the first time I've now seen it again, but the body releases the air that's inside of it. After, the heart stops, the mind stops, your organs are shutting down, but the air still makes its way out by way of farts and yawns and sounds that are hilarious. And you're trying to it's so embarrassing, I guess, but they're dead. So they don't know. And you're like, it's just, I remember that being like, I can't, how do I not laugh in this moment? That's also like the saddest moment ever. So that just always comes to mind. And we wrote that into the movie because it is just, that's like such a perfect example of those two sides of the coin of like drama, comedy and drama, that you can't have one without the other. And as far as like a moment on set, it wasn't on set, but it was like the day before. Jimmy wears dentures and he lost them when he was eating. And we turned the house inside out trying to find them because it was like, we can't shoot a movie for the next 3 weeks with our lead not having teeth. It's not going to be that type of funny movie. And that was pretty hectic, like going through the trash, like opening every piece of trash, looking for, and then in the end they were in his pocket of his robe he was wearing the whole time. So
oh my gosh, I'm stressed thinking about that. But great job finding that. I love that line. It wasn't that kind of funny movie. I really just know what you meant there. Okay,
yeah.
I just got that deeply. Yeah. Closing thoughts for our listeners, aka what do you hope audience members take away from this film? And optional question, do you have any questions for me?
I think it's about maybe how I feel about coming onto your podcast today is non-judgmental and an open space to talk about death and heal and grieve through art. And hopefully what we've transmuted onto the page and thus onto, the big screen, translates into a beautiful talking point, a beginning point, maybe for some people, or maybe even an ending point. So we want to impart that this movie, even though it is funny and silly at times, there are peaks and valleys that really do allow people to consider their own death, or maybe others that they've gone through. Or so I think part of the death positive movement and community, I think it is just allowing an openness and embracing and acceptance, and that all kinds are accepted. This is just one particular story that we decided to tell, but it really is like maybe a movie to reflect upon and take into their own lives, but also laugh and have fun.
Yeah.
But Erin, if you want to, I mean, I definitely have questions, but let Erin say a few words. Maybe we'll get that in at the end.
Yeah, I think for as far as what I would hope viewers could come away from the movie is it's sort of like that they could feel like their soul has been hugged, and the feeling of being seen if you've gone through any of the shades of what we're presenting in the film as far as a loved one in their end of life. A lot of, I think thing I've been reflecting on a lot through our film festival tour and connecting with people that are watching it. And in the midst of it, also in the last Machete and I had it was really wild. Like the last summer into fall, 4 of our friends that we grew up with, we lost 4 people our age that died. I'm sorry, 3 that we grew up with, and a girl that we know from LA. And through that, it was just so, I was keeping this thing of like, wow, here we are every day talking about death, and yay, death positivity. And then it's still getting us, just kicking us in the teeth left and right. And I think one thing that I took away from that, though, is such a heart message behind the movie is getting to write a love letter to people who've passed on, that maybe their death didn't go in the most peaceful way, or a way in which they had a lot of able to have a responsible death, meaning like their affairs taken care of and they're feeling really like in control. And it's the movie is a love letter to the idea of getting to have more autonomy and determination in your end of life. So my hope would be that people can come away from it with that like great feeling where you're like laugh and cry at the same time, kind of like when you've had a really great workout and you sweat and then you take a shower and there's just everything, you just feel like untouched and moved. That's what I hope that people would take away. And I think my question for you, Chelsea, would be, off of that theme, which is here we are up here talking about this film for 5 years, and it's like this idea of commodifying tragedy into art, which is so cathartic and important. Sometimes it's like it creates this distance where I don't feel it anymore. And I'll be like, wait, what did I just say? I'm talking about someone I love who died, and I'm able to talk about it in like catchphrases. So I'd just be curious if that happens to you and how you process through that as you have this podcast and a public figure of talking about grief and dying, and like you're still, your mom is with us and her journey and how that is for you.
Yeah, well, beautiful reflections on the film and what you hope people can take away. So I love that, and thank you for asking. I totally relate. And yes, it's like my dad is dead, the sky is blue, is kind of like my jam. And I think the fact that you feel that way a bit and I feel that way a bit, I think is good. It's also a form of self-protection. It's kind of like, well, therapists all day are holding space in this way, and like heart surgeons are seeing all kinds of crazy things, and like it's like a numbness, which I think is healthy and protective. And yet also sometimes I have to remind myself like, okay, come back to like my breath, to my body, like what is this about? Who is this for? And yeah, I actually I'm grieving grief sometimes because it's been 11 years now since my dad's death. Certainly it was very raw for the first few years, and as time goes by, it gets easier. And randomly I'll get hit like a truck with it, like anyone I'm sure listening might relate to. Of course, we all have grief differently, but I try and be kind to myself around that. If anything, sometimes I like miss feeling more raw about it, but then it's really beautiful because someone will say something in this interview or online or in my real life that is just so moving or touching or profound about their own experience with grief. And then it'll hit me and I'll cry and then I'll think more deeply about my dad. It doesn't happen all the time, but I think it's actually special and cool when something does make me feel that way. Does that make sense? Like, do you have that experience?
I very much have that experience. I totally know what you mean. Yeah, it's like you miss feeling, because it's like a form of still feeling close to that person when you're missing them and the grief is raw. And there's also there's a quote from a longer poem, but there's a purity in pure despair. And when you're in that, just your earth shook, it makes it, as Machete was saying earlier, the perspective you have on everything in your life is just like weirdly so much more grateful for what I do have. And I miss that aspect of grief. And it is a weird thing to say, because on the other hand, obviously it's a lot easier to be in a day-to-day place where I'm not just rocked by it all the time. So yeah, so I really resonate with what you're sharing there.
Thank you. And I'm glad that you can feel this distance in that, in a way, it's like the distance allowed you to make, both of you, to make this feature film. And if you were both grieving day to day for these past few years, like you might not have been able to show up for all these people who this film will impact, you know, around the world. And I think that too. Sometimes I'm like, am I just like going through the motions? Like, you know, I've interviewed hundreds of people now, which is crazy to say, who have all lost people. But I'm like, no, that's a way for me to show up and protect myself so that other people can hear these stories about more recent loss and COVID loss and all of these things that need to be told. So I guess our distance is good in a way for others.
Yeah.
I feel like we could talk so much more, you guys, about all of this. I really appreciate getting to learn more about you both specifically as filmmakers and about the reasons why Moon Manor is in the world. And I'm so glad that it is. Last question for the pod, and then we will plug your socials at the end. Do not fear. Favorite birthday tradition in one sentence?
Ooh.
Oh my God.
Or food or moment or way you celebrate your birthday.
Wait, why? Why birthday? Why this question?
Just wait for it. Just wait for it. Doesn't make a lot of sense here, but just wait.
Okay.
Because on our birthdays, Chelsea's going to personally make this thing happen. Not just to be on point with the theme here, but my birthday is like always the day before, after on Mother's Day. So I have a whole fun grief, death, mom's gone, everyone in the world celebrating their moms. It's like it's supposed to be my day, and everyone's just talking about their mom. And I'm like, well, my mom's not here. So it's actually been, that's been a thorn in my side since she died. But I would say I'm in the last few years been working on that and reframing it. And the only thing that what comes to mind is massages. I just like getting a massage, having a spa experience around my birthday.
Bless. Love massages. Machete, what about you?
Well, I didn't want to be here for the longest time. Like, I wanted out of life for the longest time, and birthdays were the worst. I have had, and Erin has witnessed this, the most existential crisis on birthdays. I'm like, this is the most traumatic day of my life. Like, it's pure drama and melancholy over here, like listening to Radiohead 24/7. But as Erin said, to reframe it, since I've gotten like the specific therapy I've needed, I've gone to therapy since I was 15, but since I've gotten the specific therapy, which is very important, I've been able to reframe it where I will do something for myself. Like, I'll get my makeup done and I'll have a photo shoot with myself, and like just all the energy I do for others, I put it back on myself, you know, whether it's like I do a lot of creativity and a lot of creative collaboration. So I'm like, yeah, you get to do it for yourself. What does it feel like for you? So I guess I like to get really vain and take photos of myself.
Yes, I love that. And what is your birthday, Machete?
April 3rd.
April 4th.
You are?
April 4th. I don't know what it means, but it means something.
We're
or
Aries.
it doesn't. Or it doesn't.
It doesn't mean anything.
Okay. Obsessed. Erin, when is your birthday?
May 11th.
Okay, see, I start my podcast about death. We end it on birth. It's kind of like the reverse life cycle. And there's just something interesting about numbers, and you can learn about someone from how they feel about their birthday. So I just feel like it's like a fun way to end. Okay, I've wrapped this up like 7 times and then brought it back. Finally, I'm keeping my promise. Where can we connect with you both online? Where can we stream Moon Manor and find out more information about your fantastic feature film?
Yeah, my Erin's social, I'm at just Erin Granat. So it's my name, but with the word just in front of it, no underscores or anything like that. I'm really just on Instagram. That's kind of just been the one. I'm on Facebook as well, but Instagram is where I'm active and would love to meet any of y'all. And my website is eringranat.com. A bunch of my writing and projects are there. And I'll just do the Moon Manor plug as long as I'm going, which is we're mainly on Instagram, which is at Moon Manor Movie. And there are underscores there in between each word. So it's moon_manor_movie. And we do have a Facebook page by way of our distributor. So I think if you just put Google Moon Manor within Facebook, however, Facebook it within Facebook, it will come up. And there is a www.moonmanormovie.com site with information, and our distributor has an official website as well. But I think the Instagram's the best place for like all the latest news and updates of what's happening when. And I'll plug it. Maybe Machete, you can plug it too. But March 11th, you will be able to watch this movie, finally, 5 years in the making, on Amazon, on iTunes, on Vudu, and all these other cool sites that the actual on-demand thing. So this is what's called our video on-demand window. So it's transactional. So anywhere you can go and like click rent the movie, that's where it will be. So March 11th, coming to your laptop near you.
Love it. Anything to add there, Machete?
Yeah, Moon Manor I have the list right here because I don't ever remember. I'm like, I know it's Amazon and iTunes. Like, that's it. Moon Manor will be available on demand, which means you can rent or buy on Apple TV, iTunes, Amazon, Xfinity On Demand, Google Play, Spectrum Cable, Vudu, and Cox Cable.
Boom.
Those are all the digital platforms that will be distributed in North America. And we have a theatrical premiere this week. I guess it doesn't matter because this will be after it. But for you, Chelsea, and if anybody else you want to tell, we have our theatrical premiere this week, starting Friday all the way to March 3rd. We're going to be in Hollywood, California. And you can watch it on the big screen in a movie theater, like public.
That's
like you can bring
so cool.
whoever you want. We'll send you a link after this is done. And my Instagram, I'm only on Instagram. My handle is Machete Bang Bang. And then my personal website is machetegoesbangbang.com if you want to check out, the deep dive into the weird worlds that I create. So head there.
Amazing. I would love to get into your deep divity dived worlds, and I would love to link those things in the show notes. Thank you both so much for being here, for giving us the deep dive onto who you are personally and professionally. This was awesome. Go see Moon Manor. It's out everywhere March 11th. I'm excited. I've already seen it. I'm going to see it again. Can't wait for everyone to see it.
Yeah, we have some watch parties. Let's have a watch party.
Oh, yeah, we should get a lot of watch parties. We should have like 50 people on a watch party.
Yes, I should totally do that.
That's not a bad idea.
Yodo, you only die once.